Hey there, Audi S3 Fanatics. It's Peter, your Audi S3 Fanatic. Welcome to another video of mine. Our project today is going to be installing a rear sway bar on my S3. Now, prior to my S3, or at least a couple cars back, I had a 2015 All-Road, which was a very front-heavy car, had the stock rear sway bar. I ended up upgrading that rear sway bar, and I can tell you with conviction, it made a tremendous amount of difference in how quickly the car would rotate in turns. Now, I will give you a little caveat. In your day-to-day driving at low speeds, your upgraded rear sway bar, in my opinion and experience, is probably not going to do a whole lot because you're taking turns relatively slow. Now, once you start pushing it in the canyons or on the track, again, from my experience with my all-road, I was able to notice that the rear end would swing around much faster to keep up with the front of the car. Now, the S3 is a completely different animal. It is very nimble. It takes corners pretty well, but I'm looking and hoping that this rear sway bar is going to take it to the next level in terms of handling performance. The sway bar that I have is going to be a non-adjustable H&R sway bar. I don't have the specifics on the millimeter size, but I believe it is a 24. But I'll make a correction in the video if I am wrong about that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this rear sway bar project. Now, the course of action that we're going to go ahead and take is we've got my S3 up on my quick jacks, and from there I'm going to go ahead and remove the rear wheels. Now, I don't know if it is completely necessary, but just to access certain parts of the rear sway bar, I'm going to go ahead and remove those to give me a little more room to work. So once the wheels are off, I'm going to go ahead and get underneath the car and disconnect several of the end links, and then I'll go ahead and remove the sway bar. From there, I'll go ahead and install the new rear sway bar. I'll go ahead and somewhat tighten up all of the connections. Then I'll lower the vehicle with the rear wheels on the car, and then I'm going to jack up the wheels to put some preload onto the sway bar, and then I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up. Now, you guys can go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong and make some suggestions, but from my understanding, when you have your vehicle up like that, you have released all of the preload off of the rear sway bar, and if you tighten it, then when you're dropping it back down, what happens is you're twisting the sway bar and putting some unnecessary torque, I believe, onto it. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the car up like this, we're going to go ahead and raise the wheel with a couple of jacks to put some preload on it. Then we'll go ahead and torque down the end links, and I believe that's the proper way to do it. Now that we're underneath the vehicle, I wanted to give you guys some specifics on some items that you're going to need to help remove this sway bar. Now, this section right here, you're looking at the rear sway bar that is connected to the chassis. You're going to have a specialized tool that's called a triple square, and the size is going to be a 10M. This one is going to go over on this side here, and there's actually 2 bolts to remove the sway bar from the chassis. Now, this here is going to be your auto leveler, and these 2 bolts right here, I believe it's going to be a T25 or a 27, but you'll want to remove that so it helps give you a little more room so that you can pull the sway bar out. And then this component right here is going to be the sway bar that is connected to an end link, and that connects to your control arm right here. And this is going to be a 13. On the passenger side, you're going to do the same thing minus the auto leveler because it's just on the driver's side. So once you remove all of that, unfortunately you're going to have to drop the exhaust down some. Now I don't think you can see it, but the further south that you go on the car, you can look up and you'll see hangers that are actually attached to the chassis that you can remove. And what it does is it just drops down the exhaust a little more to allow you room to wiggle out the sway bar from the passenger side. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now I have removed the two M10 triple squares off of the rear sway bar here. And earlier I had told you guys that you should loosen this here and remove the bolt. In all honesty, I don't know if it's completely necessary. However, kind of swinging around over here, the top of the end link is right there. Now this one I believe is recommended for you to remove, and it's actually a combination of a 16, and you're also going to need another triple square to hold the bolt in, and that's going to be an M6. So it goes in like this, and then you'll have your 16 around it to break it loose, so that way you can go ahead and swing the tie end this way to remove the sway bar. This is how you guys are going to have to remove it. This goes in there and you keep on wrenching. Alright, that bolt may have come loose. Now I had earlier told you guys to remove the wheel, and I'm really glad that I did because I have all the space to work underneath here. So this will go ahead, this nut here, the 16 will come on off, and then I believe you should be able to swing the control, this end rod right here off. And I'll go ahead and make a revision and say that you do not need to remove this here. So now this side is completely free. As you can tell, I'm kind of moving around, and now I'm going to work on the passenger side. We're over here on the passenger side, and as you can tell, I went ahead and disengaged the rear sway bar to this end link here. Don't remove it, just loosen it so you can go ahead and pivot it. So what I'll go ahead and do now is I'm going to drop my exhaust a few inches, and I will support it on a couple of jacks from each side. Now we're trying to remove the rear sway bar. What I did was I went ahead and removed it from this side here, and that's the driver's side, to kind of wiggle it, and from here I believe I should be able to kind of contort it somehow and then pull it out from this side. So we're going to give it a shot. Alright, so we went ahead and removed the sway bar, and this is the orientation that it came out of the vehicle. You want to go ahead and remove this side first, and then you'll be able to wiggle it out somehow to get this side from the exhaust section. Now that we have the rear sway bar off, we had to remove the bracket from the stock sway bars bushing, and I found the easiest way to do that is just to kind of use a flathead screwdriver, put it into the bracket here, and just kind of pry it out. Took a little force, but it worked out fine. And I'll go ahead and show you the H&R ones here. Now some of the other manufacturers will actually provide you with billet made brackets, and I think those are probably far superior than the OEM one, because you can actually inject some lubrication in there so it doesn't squeak so much, and that's one of the reasons why I do want to go ahead and lubricate this with some lithium grease, just to make the rotation of it a little easier with less squeaks. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to get underneath the car and try to finagle my sway bar back in. So in my attempts to get the rear sway bar in, I wasn't able to finagle it. I've spent probably 15 to 20 minutes trying to wiggle it in and out. I even took my stock sway bar, was able to put it back in and try to do the same thing with the H&R. Unfortunately, because it is thicker, the distance or the room that I had for the stock OEM bar, I wasn't able to do it with the H&R. Just to make my life a little easier, what I will go ahead and do is I'm just gonna drop the driver's side suspension control arm down. It's just a matter of 2 bolts. It's probably going to make my life a whole lot easier, as it just allows the control arm to kind of pivot down so that I can get the sway bar through. If you guys can come up with a better technique, all power to you. This is just a couple of additional steps, and I just think it's going to make my life a whole lot easier. As I recommended you guys to go ahead and drop the control arm here, or at least disconnect it from your shock and knuckle, it allowed the rear control arm to actually drop, and I was able to get the sway bar in. That just gave me a lot of space. So that's probably why a lot of manufacturers will tell you, if you are actually putting in a sway bar, do it at the same time when you're doing springs or coilovers, because it just makes the installation process so much easier. So now that I have the sway bar in, I'll go ahead and hand tighten the bushing into the chassis, and then I'll button up everything else. We'll go ahead and reconnect the control arm to the shock and the knuckle, tighten that portion up, and then we'll go ahead and jack up the wheel to put some preload on the sway bar, tighten it up at that point, and then I'll give you guys an update. Here you can see the sway bar completely installed. I went ahead and torqued everything down, and I will provide you guys some torque specs. There's the control arm that I went ahead and lowered, and if you take a look here, I've got my wheels jacked up so I can put some preload on the rear sway bar to adjust it down. So we are pretty much good to go at this point. Now that we've got the rear sway bar installed completely, I wanted to share with you guys just some final thoughts. Obviously, I don't have any feedback on the rear sway bar as I haven't driven the car yet. However, I do have a track event in a week, and should be able to provide you some pretty good insight on how the car rotates into turns. Now, anybody looking to do the rear sway bar, I believe you guys should be able to accomplish it with jack stands. You don't need to have a lift. As long as you've got 2 as a minimum, 4 would be better jack stands, you can definitely get it done. Just make sure that you also have the triple squares, because there are 2 nuts or bolts that are triple squared on top, and without those you're not going to be able to remove those bolts. Overall, the project took me about 2.5 hours or so, and that's a lot of stopping to record this DIY. Once again, thanks for stopping by and taking a look at another the Audi S3 Fanatic DIY video. If you do like my videos, please subscribe, share it, and give me a thumbs up. Until the next time, guys, this is Peter signing off.